Hi, everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces, some new faces. We are very excited for our Farm Yarns conversation today. The whole team is joining for this one, so it's truly special. We saved this topic for today, given our origin story. As some of you might be familiar with the work that we do at Farmers Footprint, or if this is the first time that you hear about us, we are a nonprofit organization that was founded about 5 years ago at this point and really emerged from the intersection between human and planetary health after our founder, Zach Bush, did a study mapping the way that pesticides ran down through the Mississippi River and ended in Virginia, and the correlation between that and the rise of autoimmune diseases in that area. So after that documentary was released, which you can find on our website, it's a short film, like a 20-minute film called The Beginning. That's how everything that we do today was born. So right now, after a few years, our work has evolved and we've included more things to complement that and support that. But health and harmony and this intersection is truly one of the, if not the core pillar of the work that we do at Farmers Footprint. So it is an honor to be here with these incredible speakers that have joined us for this conversation, and all of you that are tuning in on this Tuesday afternoon to be in conversation with us. And we hope to make this a really interesting and engaging experience for everyone here. I see that some people are still coming in, so I'm going to keep this really brief, but I did want to start sharing a little bit more about who we are as Farmers Footprint and the areas of our work. So with that, Andrew, I don't know if you like to share your screen and thank you. You can go to the next one. Perfect. So just for context on how do we organize our work at Farmers Footprint, we have two main areas of focus of our work, which are storytelling and community. And with the storytelling, it's mostly digital. We are starting to have some immersive storytelling activations that are in person. But the way that we view our work is we mobilize global communities through our storytelling and then foster containers that can anchor that storytelling and mobilizing into tangible change at a local level. And that happens through the community. So an example of that would be we have the Ripple Effect, which is our agriculture media channel. And that is the storytelling component, and the way that that is expressed in the community is through the Garden Club course, which is a 12-module course sharing resources and education and how to grow food in your backyard. So, and we do this with each pillar of our work. And there are 3 pillars of our work, which are health, agriculture, and culture. And with each of these channels, we have a storytelling component and a community component. So this month, we just launched our health channel, which is Health in Harmony. And the first series of that channel is Nurtured by Nature. And we have Kelly Ryerson, who is joining us for today's conversation, that shared her story and her journey of healing in that channel as the first feature of that channel. So if you haven't seen it yet, it is an incredibly inspiring story of her journey, which I'm sure many of us and maybe many of you might resonate with as well. So yeah, really, really encouraging you to go check that out. And we launched our agriculture channel last month with an incredible farmer story there as well. And we will be launching our culture channel in January of next year. So that is kind of a high level picture of our work at Farmers Footprint and the topics that we cover and the ways in which we approach conversations in this movement. Would you go to the next slide, please? So today, in the spirit of Giving Tuesday, we have some great tote bags that I'm not sure why the picture is not showing in the slide, but you might have seen last year for I think it was for Earth Day, we did some t-shirts that had a really fun print saying "Hope grows here." And this year we are having some tote bags. So they're a great, fun way to just be an ambassador. And you can take your tote bag to the farmer's market or just use it however you want. But for every donation that comes through today that's over $50, we will send you one of these tote bags that hopefully you will be able to use over and over again. So just as that's a fun Giving Tuesday gift that we have this year. If any of you are interested in that. And could we go to the next one, please, Andrew? Again, just in the spirit of Giving Tuesday, these are our goals for the next year for each of these channels. As you see here, health is the core pillar of our work and a really, really strong focus of the work that we do, both from an educational standpoint, storytelling, community building as well. So if you feel inspired by this conversation today to support our programming in general, or if there's an area of our work that more specifically resonates with you, please let us know and we will make sure that your donation goes towards that. Could you go to the next one, please? And there are many ways that you can support our work, whether it's through check, recurring donations are great, or if you'd like to connect one-on-one with myself or someone on the team to learn more specifically about our work, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we're happy to facilitate whichever way is best for your donation. And with that, I'm gonna pass the mic to Andrew to continue guiding us through the rest of our evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Alana. Welcome, everybody, to another Farm Yarns. This is actually, is this the fifth one? I think this is our fifth. But this is the final one of 2024. This is something that we introduced this year, and they've been an incredible way for us to share information with our community. And a little bit about these Farm Yarns events. It's really a great opportunity for us to engage with our community and the experts that we bring in to talk about specific topics. The very first one we had was about hemp, and today we're here talking about the intersection of planetary and human health. And we really like to make this space an open space for dialogue and really a safe space to ask the hard questions, or even the questions that you might feel are just too stupid in a way to ask. But there's really no such thing as a stupid question, and we're all learning all the time. And when we can approach life with that kind of open mind and open heart, then that's how we further understand each other, how we further understand how we're moving in this world and on this earth. And for me, it's a personal mission to be looking at the world and looking at the earth and realizing that we're living in two different things. We're living in the world and we're living on the earth. And so part of what we do with Farmer's Footprint is bridging that gap and making those things unite once again, bringing our world back into the earth and vice versa. And so through these farm yards discussions, we're getting closer to that, and we're just engaging with that. And like Alana was saying, today's theme is called Nurtured by Nature, which draws inspiration from our newly launched channel, Health and Harmony. If you have not checked it out, please do. There's so much information there. The channels that we've been launching, we just have so much incredible information to share there. And with this channel, like I said, we're exploring the intersection of planetary health and human health and how those things come together and how the health of the planet really affects our own personal health. We explore soil microbiome and the gut microbiome. We have a series called Nurtured by Nature, which features Kelly as the first series in that. And there are also coming up, we have series about, I'm just looking at my notes here. We're having something all about glyphosate, which is sharing information about how to advocate for glyphosate change and ways in which that you can, use alternate methods to get rid of your weeds, or even to just look at weeds completely differently. So there's tons of information on our Health and Harmony channel. And today we have our incredible guests, and I'm gonna briefly introduce them and let them introduce themselves. Oh, and also in the spirit of making this an open space, if any questions come in mind, or if you have a curiosity about anything that is brought up today, or you have something that you want to bring in yourself, pop those questions in the chat. We'll do our best to get to them towards the end of this. This is being recorded, so we'll be uploading the replay in our community. And if you're not a member of our community, it's an incredible place to be a part of. It's an online community. We're nearly 10,000 people in there, and it is that safe space to just share information. We share job opportunities there in the regenerative space. The Garden Club lives there, which is an incredible resource. If you're a brand new gardener, have never grown anything in your life, or if you're a seasoned veteran, it's an excellent resource for anybody to use, Garden Club. And so I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers today and let them introduce themselves a little bit more, starting with Dr. Nasha Winters.
Hi, everybody. Andrew, you want me to jump in? Just a quick brief howdy? Okay.
Howdy intro. Who are you?
Perfect. I am Dr. Nasha Winters. I'm a naturopathic oncologist and metabolic health specialist. And I have been playing in the sandbox of the soil and human health and planetary health for over 30 years. I'm a 33-year cancer thriver. And that has been my why, and trying to help other people not have to meet that label in their lifetime. So I'm very excited about being with all of you here tonight and learning from some of my heroes as well, and wonderful to be with all of you.
Thanks, Nasha. And we also have Oliver English.
Good evening, everybody. I guess depending on where you are in the world, but hello. My name is Oliver English. I'm a filmmaker, chef, and passionate food advocate. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Common Table Creative. We're a global production and hospitality company specializing in telling stories about the future and the power of food. And with that work, we have had the opportunity to visit 60, 70 farms all over the world the past couple of years and interview some of the world's leading experts in food and sustainability and nutrition. and are incredibly passionate about telling stories about a more regenerative, healthy, sustainable food system. And our most recent documentary, Feeding Tomorrow, came out in January. And I'm proud to plug it also because Zach is in it. And we had the opportunity to interview Zach many years ago, and he's been a great source of inspiration for us as a team and someone who I've learned a lot from and been inspired by for many years. So excited to be here today and share some of our insights.
Thanks, Oliver. And we also have Kelly Ryerson, aka the
Hi,
Glyphosate
everyone.
Girl.
Hey, Andrew. So let's see, my path to glyphosate and talking about these topics is based in something that probably most people here will relate to. I had chronic illness, vague chronic illness, autoimmune-like. No doctor could tell me exactly what was wrong. This was probably about 10 years ago. And after a long struggle of trying to get healthy, I was able to get there through food choices and then suddenly realize the situation with glyphosate and how it's a poison in our food. And actually I started a blog called Glyphosate Girl in 2018 to cover the Monsanto Roundup cancer trials in San Francisco. So I documented all those. And I actually went by Glyphosate Girl because I was very scared of Monsanto at the time. And so it was anonymous, but I quickly found out that they knew exactly who I was. And so I went ahead and let my name be known. And today I work both in health and in farming and working in regenerative farming and encouraging the adoption of those practices, particularly at a policy level. So a lot of interaction now with government decision makers.
Amazing. Wonderful. So we're going to dive into some questions for y'all now. And I'm going to start with Nasha. And I'm also going to share my screen once more and get these questions up. So, Dr. Nasha, could you briefly explain the concept of metabolic health and its connection to disease development?
Oof, well, wow. I'll do as brief as I possibly can. It's actually pretty simple though. Metabolic health is just a reflection of our cellular energy and our cellular energy systems. It's like our cellular bank account. And so the way our metabolic health expresses is through that. And I like to call it the terrain. That makes sense to my brain. It also makes probably good sense to your community's brain since we kind of look through the world through a similar filter. And this particular expression of your metabolic health is influential in every aspect of your physiology, from your immune response to your hormonal modulation, and even the way your body is able to repair or regenerate. So that's an important piece to just keep in mind, of just thinking of it as an energy currency. But I also think it's important to point out that in the United States, we've had studies over the last few years that show that Americans, at least, and this is likely true for all developed countries around the globe, are less than 7% of us are actually considered metabolically healthy, meaning less than 7% of us are walking around with a really nice bank account of our energy reserves and our ability to perform the basic physiologic functions. So we can measure this through things like blood pressure, blood glucose and insulin levels, hip to waist ratios, cholesterol levels. These are what we're talking about when we talk about metrics of metabolic health. And to now, for you all to hear this, to understand that 93+% of us are metabolically unhealthy, you start to get the picture that this is a big problem. And just a final piece to kind of throw out there, since Kelly brought this up about her own journey with autoimmunity. Just last week, there was a study that came out that the #1 most prescribed pharmaceutical today is a drug called methotrexate. And methotrexate is a drug notorious in the treatment of autoimmune conditions. So the fact that it bypasses antidepressants and hypertensives is pretty telling of the nature of the world we're in today. So I just think I'll pause there for just a moment to see if there's anything else you want to ask around the metabolic piece.
Well, so it sounds like it's kind of like almost like our battery operating.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yep, absolutely. And so 93% of us, our battery is running really desperately low.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so it's all these different pillars, all these things that equate to the overall metabolic health.
Exactly. And we used to think of just metabolic of just being sort of how you burn a calorie. It goes beyond that. Is I hopefully have impressed upon you that it's all of our physiologic functions are metabolic in nature.
So how long have we been looking at gauging our metabolic health? Like, how long have we been documenting that? Like, do we know when it got to 7%? When was there a time when it was over 50%?
Great question. So we actually didn't have our first case of cardiovascular disease showing up until the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's one clue. Diabetes at that time was virtually unheard of, and it was always a disease of the affluent, and very much like people who were over consuming, whatever that may be. Okay, so we could understand back then it was more about obesity and sort of gluttony, which is how we've kind of categorized and sort of siloed people in this. But now it extends beyond that, because we have an enormous number of people walking around that we call tophies, that on the outside, fat on the inside, which are metabolic expressions of things happening more at that physiologic cellular level that are out of balance. So you can no longer judge a book by its cover. And claim somebody to be healthy or unhealthy just from their body composition. And so we then started to understand that as we started to have understandings around BMI and the hip to waist ratio, which we started talking about in the 1980s. And then we started really seeing this explosion. Now 60% of the population has at least one chronic disease. That's really picked up momentum since the mid 80s. And thanks to your website and some of the findings, it correlates very closely to post-World War II events of changes in our big ag, big pharma, nature.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads into the second part of my question, or second and third part of my questions for you. So can you explain how metabolic health is influenced by the soil microbiome and how agricultural systems play a role in supporting our health?
Or currently the opposite of that, and then we are globally, right?
Or yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, think about, it's very simple, and I feel kind of silly saying it this way, but our Earth's equivalent of the microbiome is that of the human gut microbiome. They're very much interrelated. And as we began monocropping our planet after World War II, and sanctions and whatnot, and the inventions of several chemicals to chemicalize our food production, we also started monocropping ourselves. And when we start to understand things, which, Kelly is the pro here, and I'm sure she'll go into detail, but when we start to understand that glyphosate in particular is just a big antibiotic, and when you think that we've evolved from 170,000 years ago of a bacteria known as our mitochondria, which takes up the equivalent of upwards of 20% of our body mass, which is also the very, very integral reason for our metabolic well-being, it's not difficult to make those connections to understand that a massive antibiotic exposure to our primal evolution is destroying us. And so destroying the soil destroys us, very simply put. And the different forms of farming we do today is very different than what our grandparents and our great-grandparents did. And so in a very short period of time, we've changed a lot of things drastically, and our bodies have not been able to adapt.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Yeah. And when you monocrop, you also, both the soil of the planet and the soil of ourselves, you deplete nutrients. You don't have the building blocks to actually repair and regenerate and nourish. And so suddenly you have a system that's functioning less and less and less effectively and efficiently, not just in the current generation, but in the generations to follow.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think about, I think the garden and the farm provides all the metaphors you'll ever need for life. So with regenerative farming and gardening, you want as many living systems there as possible, because if one thing gets out of hand, you don't just have one thing to, say you have a pest problem of aphids, right? You don't want to just have ladybugs being the only thing that you have to get rid of your aphids. You want to have a healthy plant to not be destroyed by the aphids. You want to have other insects to come in. So it makes sense why we need to have all of these different things functioning within ourselves to either fight back or just keep us strong so that nothing can even penetrate.
Exactly, exactly.
And so have you found any specific examples or insights into how soil health directly impacts human health and well-being?
I mean, it's very easy because I test everyone in ridiculous amounts. I barely leave any blood left in my patient population, but we're able now to really test metrics. Like I mentioned about testing for metabolic health, you can test insulin levels, you can check levels of inflammation, such as C-reactive protein. You can check for methylation through B vitamin status, homocysteine levels. So that's telling us a lot of the metabolic workings at the blood chemistry level. You can even now have hair, urine, blood samples taken to look at certain organophosphates and glyphosate exposures. You can wear silicone bands that are testing for other toxicants in our system. We have so many ways today in modern times to actually test and assess. So to understand what we're dealing with, understand the pattern, to then understand a solution that's going to be best fit to that pattern. It's very easy to see the correlations between elevations of inflammation, so very specific inflammatory cytokines, these markers. It's also very easy to see changes in our hormonal milieu. So I can actually test someone who's just recently handled some receipts holding plastics, and you can actually test for elevations in serum estrogen levels. Really concerning there. You can look at other hormonal metabolites. You can look at full endocrine dysfunction through thyroid, through imaging, through all types of functional medicine testing, as well as standard testing. You can see the rise of insulin. You can see the change in hormones in general. Now we have a massive explosion of things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is basically testosterone excess in women because their estrogen levels are now being changed by all the exogenous hormone disruption. And men, boys, having the most low levels of testosterone I've ever seen in my 30 plus years of practice. Everyone thinks these are just hormone deficiencies, so we're just going to give them exogenous hormones to replace it. But the problem is that you have to think of the teeter-totter. If estrogen is high in women, testosterone is low or normal. If estrogen is high in men, testosterone is low. So the opposite is true in women. When testosterone is high, estrogen is low. And when testosterone is high in men, typically estrogen is normal or in the low range. So it's this balancing act that we're constantly bumping up against with these changes in our food systems, changes in our agricultural practices, changes in our environment in general that are having deep implications that we're able to absolutely see and test in patients. And when we can change their diet, change their lifestyle, change their exposures, help them gently, naturally chelate out things with like fulvic and humic acid, for instance, to chelate out the glyphosate, avoid the exposure to begin with, we normalize their function all around. Their quality of life improves and their metrics improve just in correlation as well.
Yeah, I mean, bringing up the receipts, it makes me think about lifestyle in general. And I think about scents and how everything is so scented, and that there's a correlation to the hormone disruption with odors, right? And looking at laundry detergents, for example, and dryer sheets and those things, it's like we need to teach ourselves that is not actually what clean smells like.
Exactly.
Well, that's actually disrupting our whole system.
100%. I mean, just this afternoon, I have a live call with my doctors that I train twice a month. And today we were doing case studies. And it was a 44-year-old woman from Nicaragua who now lives in the United States, but her father is a farmer and still uses tons of glyphosate on the farm. Her and her 15-year-old daughter and her 8-year-old daughter have been living on that farm. She now has a very aggressive neuroendocrine gastric tumor that's now metastasized into her ovaries. And her 15-year-old daughter has polycystic ovarian syndrome, and the 8-year-old daughter has started menstruating. And when we did their phthalate testing, we just did a bunch of testing on them. All of them look like they've got more testosterone than most grown men, which is unfortunate. So it's completely changed their chemistry, but it's also thrown off they all have insulin, metabolic syndrome. They all have very low, dangerously low vitamin D levels. They have all these patterns that set them up. So not only is mom currently dealing for the fight of her life with cancer, but her daughter is close on her heels and her even younger daughter. And so to look at their tests today and these doctors just eyeballs popping out because this woman just a few months ago got breast implants. Nothing on her body is normal of her, body care products, her makeup, her culture pushes. So I love that culture is discussed in this group as well. Her culture pushes her to look and be a certain way, especially as a single Latina mother who has to look a certain way to draw in a mate today. And that drawing in her entire world was one giant scented everything. To the body care products, is smelling nice, to the toilet paper. I live here in Mexico. It is very difficult to find products without scent. Very difficult. We had to go out of our way to find toilet paper without fragrance. And so for the family now to understand, and her daughters to now understand, you don't want things that smell nice. You want to smell nice naturally. And so it's a complete change of mindset around this. And so returning people back to the rhythm of nature, the rhythm of themselves, helping them understand, as Joel Salatin once said in his book, folks, this ain't normal. We've normalized so much of our modern way of living that it's killing us.
Yeah. And it's all very new too. And that's where I see hope in creating products. I don't think that we need to go to a point where we're not wearing makeup and we're not
There's clean
nice.
ways to do it. Exactly.
There's clean ways to do it. And I think it's an opportunity for new brands or existing brands to completely shift the way that they make things and just make them. We don't need to change the way that we've made life so comfortable and enjoyable. We just need to make it healthier for us. So,
and we've created in our network, we're constantly adding, these organic clothing companies, these organic makeup companies, body care products, to your point, because that is the reality. This is living in modern time. How can we upgrade it? And how can we make it healthier for all? Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Move on. Okay. Oliver. Now, Oliver, through your documentaries and storytelling, you've brought attention to the interconnectedness of human and planetary health. Could you share a moment or story that moved you deeply and seemed to ignite meaningful action or progress in creating a more regenerative global food system?
Absolutely. It is a moment that I think of frequently, and it is the first time that I met a farmer. I grew up in the restaurant business. I should start there. My parents are chefs. They met at cooking school, and I grew up working in restaurants from when I was very small, working every job in the business, from dishwasher to busboy to pizza cook to line cook, really the whole thing. And eventually ended up growing into a role of designing, developing restaurants all around the world. And about 7 years ago, I was living and working in the Bahamas to open a restaurant. And we opened it. It was a 270-seat restaurant, a lot of volume, 3 day parts, a big, huge operation. And I went into the walk-in refrigerator one day and I looked at all the produce and it looked just sad and decrepit. And I was like, "Chef, we can't serve this. This is not going to fly." And he's like, "Everything's being shipped in from the US. It's, getting held up in port. I don't know what you want me to do." I said, "Can you guys help me find a local farm? Maybe we can go get some produce." And the first they sent me to this indoor hydroponic cucumber farm, which looked very impressive, but everything was kind of being grown in these fake artificial growth plastic boxes, and I just didn't feel right to me. And I ended up just going for a walk around the corner, and I ended up bumping into this guy named Sakane, this farmer, the first farmer I ever met. And by contrast to this very chemical environment inside, Sakane greets me with a big smile, big farmer hat, this cool machete knife, and he invites me to come check out this little farm that he and his family are working to restore, literally an 1.5 acre farm next to the airport. And by insane contrast to what I just seen inside, this farm, and I didn't know it yet, but it was a small regenerative farm. It had birds and butterflies and bees and trees and chickens running around and multiple different types of crops. And as we walked around, he had this warmth and joy and passion about food and farming and soil that I had never really experienced before. And he shared with me that the weather patterns that he grew up with were so different from the ones today because of climate change that he doesn't know what to plant. He can't predict it anymore. And he grew up in his dad was a farmer. He also shared with me that he was one of the first people in his family to go plant-based, plant-forward 20 years prior, at a time when a lot of fast food and processed food was being imported into the Bahamas. And he was the only person in his family to not develop a chronic disease.
Wow.
And we also looked into the distance on this farm, and we saw these like huge, huge smokestacks. I said, Sakani, what's that? He said, man, there used to be 12,000 farms in the Bahamas. Now there are 1,200. Everything is industrialized in the United States, shipped in on styrofoam, wrapped in plastic, and there is so much waste that they send it to the landfill and they burn it. And here I am on this beautiful little farm meeting this guy who has this incredible, just vibe about him. And I said, but he's dealing with these, very real challenges. And I said, Sakane, how do you deal with all of this? How do you deal with, your perspective and what you're doing here? What's your philosophy? What gets you through? And he said, and I'll never forget this. He said, man, if I can feed people good quality food, I can change the way they look at food, and in turn, change the way they look at life. And I get goosebumps every time I tell that story, because
I just got goosebumps myself. Come on, that's
yeah. And
that's
I realized,
that's
in that
gospel.
moment, I was like, man, more people need to meet farmers. I'm 27 years of my life at that point. Parents are chefs, studied hospitality in school, worked in the restaurant business my whole life, never met a farmer. And if someone like me had never met a farmer, maybe a lot of other people hadn't met farmers. And I called my little brother, who was at the New York Film Academy at the time, and he said, let's film an interview with him. This guy sounds awesome. And little did we know that would be the beginning of a 7-year journey of us creating our first feature documentary about the future of food. We were so inspired by this story about a farmer on the front lines of dealing with health, climate change, societal issues, but really creating a positive model for feeding healthy food to his community, and thought, what if we tell his story and the other stories of innovators out there on the front lines of creating positive change in our food system? Sakani was the first person to really demonstrate to me how deeply interconnected our food system is with human health, environmental health, and societal health. And we thought, this guy needs to have his story told. And he's actually one of the main farmers in our film, again, that Zach is in as well. And that chance, although I realize now there's nothing chance about it, but that encounter with Sakane would radically transform the trajectory of my life. We spent the next 7 years interviewing leaders in healthcare, education, sustainability, regenerative agriculture, focusing on fixing our broken food system, again, through the lens of healthcare, agriculture, and education. And we became determined to share their stories as positive examples of how we can create a more just and regenerative world. And I think what I've come to realize, like I said earlier, we've been to 60 to 70 farms now all around the world. We ended up starting a production company that we work with food companies, NGOs, and nonprofits to share stories about the power and the future of food, and how food is an interconnected solution to so many of these challenges we face. And I think that if I reflect upon all of those experiences, a few things. I think one, food is our most intimate connection with the natural world. We literally ingest what comes from the soil into our bodies, and that becomes us. And Zach talks about this in our film. Two, we have the solutions already to all of the challenges that we face. It's not some faraway tech thing that we haven't invented yet that's going to save us. It's not some bag, a meal in a bag that's green goo. We have the solutions already. And many of the solutions have been practiced by indigenous communities, by the way, for generations and generations and generations. So we know how to fix agriculture. We know how to move our food system into a restorative, regenerative direction. We know how to look at food as medicine. In our film, we actually feature the first working farm on a hospital campus in the United States. And the main nutritionist in our film is treating patients in the hospital with whole food plants grown in nutrient-dense soils. And there are, on different plots of the hospital, a farm, there are different vegetables that address different health ailments. We know how to do this. We also feature in the inner city in Boston, and it was considered historically a food desert, a working example of education that is holistic and incorporates learning gardens, no processed or junk food, and scratch cooking. And the outcomes for these kids is profound. And we were so inspired on the topic of education real quick. We were so inspired by that story that our team ended up building a regenerative school farm at a public middle school here in Santa Monica about 2.5 years ago. And it has had profoundly positive impacts on the lives of these kids. I mean, obviously, I know you guys have been talking about farms and gardens and the power of it, but I have seen it, and it is, again, it is not rocket science. This is a realignment. We have parents who come to us, and every single kid who goes to that school now spends at least an hour on the farm every single day learning about carbon sequestration, composting, healthy soils. And we have parents come to us on a weekly basis for volunteer days and say, "Thank you so much. My child never used to eat kale. Now they like kale. Could not get them to eat green beans at Thanksgiving. Now they love green beans. And by the way, here's the compost, because my third grader is learning about compost in school, and they came home and now our freezer is full of compost. Thank you very much," they say with a little bit of a smile. But it's a beautiful thing. And I think that's what we've learned. That's what I've realized. And that's what excites me so much, is that we already have the solutions to the biggest challenges we face. Now, we need large scale adoption of these solutions, but we already have working models of what works. And it's not rocket science. Again, it's a realignment. And I've seen these examples of these positive solutions all around the country. And people all around the country with not a whole lot of resources are picking up the torch and saying, the system is broken. We're going to go ahead and create a new model of something that works in agriculture and healthcare and education. And that is what we have the capacity to do together.
Amazing. Yeah, 1,000,000%. And that's, the power of growing your own food, even if so that's something that I've experienced with our garden club. So we have a member who lives in the city, just has a balcony. She doesn't have she has a balcony. That's her outdoor space. And she was growing basil and rosemary and all these herbs, because that was the amount of space that she could grow. It was just herbs. And she's hoping to get land someday. But this has radically changed her life, because now she gets to, incorporate those herbs into her meal. And it's just, when you have that experience, it does change. And I've never heard a story where there's a negative impact. It's only positive.
100%. And like you said, and we actually turned our front lawn in Venice Beach into a mini permaculture experiment here also, which is maybe on the more extreme side of things. But whether you do that, whether you have a small herb bed, or whether you have one basil plant in your window, it is about the relationship that you start to develop with a plant. And when you start to see something grow, like a tomato plant, you think differently about throwing that tomato in the trash versus composting that tomato if you don't get to eat it, or you're certainly going to eat all of it if you grow it. So it changes your relationship to the entire system of growing food. I'd also just like to make one other quick point about this is, what we've also learned, and I believe this to be true, is there has never been a more exciting time to be someone who loves to eat and to be part of the regenerative food movement. There have never been more options on the shelf in grocery stores to support regeneratively certified grown foods than there have been ever, at least with the various forms of the regenerative organic or regenerative certified label. If you look at options today, and I have done this, versus 6 months ago versus a year ago, I don't know the exact numbers, but the amount of foods that you can support in the grocery stores, eggs, meat, rice, beans, olive oil, coffee, etc., staples, are profound and increasing by the day. So this is a really exciting time for those of us who want to be involved in this movement, who want to support a better, healthier food system, to say, we're not going to buy the BS. They can keep making it, and that's going to dwindle away, because eventually people are going to get sick of it, and they're starting to, and that's what we're doing here today. But we are going to support with our food dollars this new system that we believe in. And I tell people, you don't have to go throw away everything in your cupboard, immediately, although sometimes it's a good idea. But go to the grocery store, switch one item to a regeneratively organic certified item. One item. And then maybe next week it's 2 items. And you realize that that item is a lot more flavorful because it's grown in a system that supports ecological health, environmental stewardship, and healthy soils. And when you do all those things, you create conditions in the soil that actually support flavor. So there's this direct correlation between the flavor, nutrient density of the plant or the animal or whatever the regenerative food product is, and the health of that ecosystem. You can tell there's a lot of pots behind me, I guess, back there. I love to cook, and I'm a chef as well. And I can tell you, cooking with regenerative or organic ingredients is a profoundly different experience from a flavor profile perspective, because they are grown in healthy soils. And there's this deep fundamental connection between the health of the soil, the health of the plant, the health of the animal, the health of the ecosystem, and then our health as we eat and support those foods.
Yeah. And that's a point that I really wanted to touch on with you being a chef, being a cook. That is because you got to have that experience, meeting that farmer, seeing the farm, and then really understanding what the difference in the flavor of these foods, right? If we can get every chef around the world to just have that experience, I mean, that the impact that will have. Because if they're able to stop ordering from, the commercial things and like you said, even if it's just starting with one thing, if they can just get their rice from a regenerative farm, starting there, and then incorporating more and more, and taking it the next step further and seeing, okay, who around me, who in my, within 10 miles, 20, 50 miles of me is growing food. How are they growing that food? I need to support them.
100%. And, we asked one of the main farmer in our film, he's got a great quote. And I said to him, what does feeding tomorrow mean to you? And he said, I think I remember this quote, feeding tomorrow is the people who eat food and the people who grow food working together to transform the entire ecology of our planet. And in doing so, transforming our relationships with ourselves and with our communities at large. I got it. Actually, that's it, word for word. But the point there is that, farmers, and we've now been to farms all over the country. We do a lot of work with American Farmland Trust. Farmers are interested, particularly younger farmers, are interested and really wanting to move in this direction. And if we, the consumers, continue to show them and support them through purchasing these products, that this is what we want, this transition will happen in a very big way. But it's got to happen from the ground up. It's got to happen at the grassroots level. And that's why it's one purchase at a time, two purchases at a time, three purchases at a time. That's incredibly powerful. We are active agents of change, each one of us. And the food that we put on our plate is a powerful, powerful vote for the kind of world we want to create, and a powerful vehicle for change. And whether that's, what we get for cooking for our families, buying rice, just switching to rice, or it's, supporting a restaurant who's going to do that, that is what it's all about. And restaurants do have a very important role to play, because restaurants help shape culture. Restaurants help define and, envision what's cool and what's new. And I do see, and I do believe, and I am connected to the chef community, although I'm not really in the restaurant business anymore. I am tapped into that world, and people are starting to get it. People are really starting to get it. Chefs have always loved flavor, and they realize that shipping things up from South America or shipping things from the other side of the world doesn't really cut it. And I do see this kind of shift back towards seasonality and respect for ingredients that had always been there, but we had gone away from it in the past couple of decades. But this is a powerful moment. This is a powerful moment and an exciting moment to be part of this movement, because we can support these products like never before. And we can live healthier lives and have a more enjoyable experience as well. I should mention as well, and not that everyone needs to be drinking, not that I'm promoting this, but regenerative wine is also a really big opportunity as well. And I think so often the sustainability movement has had this narrative of, you have to do less bad, you have to use less lights, you have to eat less this, you have to do less this. This regenerative movement, this moment, is about how do we do more good through our consumption? How can we have a great dinner party, bring our friends over to the table and cook a delicious meal and have a bottle of wine, and have all of those foods support healthier ecosystems, healthier soils, and communities that can flourish within them? That's what it's about. That's what the idea, I believe, regeneration is all about. It is about enjoying life, but also living healthier lives while supporting the farms of today and tomorrow. And it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. It needs to be a positive narrative about, this movement should be like a great dinner party, with lots of candles and all your friends and a great big meal. And we just choose not to buy poison anymore collectively. And we choose to support the farmers that are doing it right. And that's what I've seen all over the world. And that's what I believe we have the capacity to do. And I know my friends at Farmers Footprint believe that as well, as you guys are great storytellers. But that's where we're at. And it's a beautiful place to be. It's really exciting.
Yeah. And it all comes back to the farm. I want to be able to support my local restaurants, right? But I'm not going to go eat a meal where I know everything's cooked in seed oil and I don't know where all the ingredients are coming from. And like, what am I, the restaurant experience has kind of been tainted a bit because I don't know what I'm eating. But if I know where my restaurant is getting their food from, it all comes back to the farm. In supporting your restaurants, they're supporting the farms and supporting our health.
Yes. Can I leave you with one final note, Andrew, on the restaurant point about speaking up? Just one last point.
Give it to me.
Okay. When I was growing up in the restaurant business, there was this older kind of manager guy, and he shared with me some insight. And we had this rule that if someone came into the restaurant and made a comment, why do you still have straws, or why'd you take the salmon off the menu? We assumed that maybe 10 to 15, maybe 20 people were thinking it, but maybe they didn't want to say anything because, sometimes you just want to come into the restaurant and have a good time and not bother anyone. I get that. So if 2 people made that same comment, we made a note in this little book. If 3 people made that comment or 4 people made that comment, we made the change. And so we as a restaurant depended upon, and including my family, and responded to our consumers. So restaurants are listening. Grocery stores are listening. Politicians, at least they should be listening. Businesses certainly are listening. So when we speak up, when we make our voices heard, when we ask the question, hey, are you guys composting? Are you guys sourcing any regenerative ingredients? Are you using seed oils? That matters, and you can do it in a way that's not annoying and pestery, but speak up, say something, it does matter. And we, from a restaurateur perspective, are listening. And if enough people are saying that, they make the change. Walmart never used to serve organic milk until the moms all across the country wrote to them and said, we want organic milk. And now they're the biggest distributor of organic produce in the entire country. Wow. Say what you will about Walmart, but that story speaks to the power of consumers sharing their voice.
That is an excellent point. And I'm going to drive that home. Yeah, we have the power. I mean, we as the consumers have the power. So, and it's up to us to make that change. So amazing. Thank you so much, Oliver.
Thank you.
I am going to move it on to Kelly now. I saw your little dog behind you there, Kelly. I don't know if you're still around.
She decided to start barking just now.
Oh. Okay, glyphosate girl, Kelly. So glyphosate exposure has gained global attention. Could you unpack its impact on human health, particularly in the rise of chronic diseases?
Yes, and glyphosate is something that has been fortunately popularized with thanks to Farmers Footprint. And for those who don't know, though I'm pretty sure everyone in this audience would know, glyphosate is the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup. It's the most used pesticide of all time, and about 300 million pounds of Roundup is dumped on our farmland in the United States each year. And that's just agricultural use. That in a 10% more is used in home and garden and parks. And actually, remarkably, in our national parks like Yellowstone and Yosemite, they dump it. It's also used in forestry to kill out any competing flora or any competing trees. So that has led to a lot of cancer in places that do forestry. So really, it's omnipresent. It is in the rain, it's in the water, it's in the food. It's been found in breast milk and hair and urine, and really is just everywhere. So this was originally marketed as being completely non-toxic and a real miracle to the agricultural world, because they had been using some really heavy-duty toxic pesticides before the advent of glyphosate, and it hit the market in the mid 1970s. To this day, a lot of salespeople will say it's safe enough to drink. And that has been one of the biggest travesties that has ever occurred to the human population. And all of this at the expense of the planet, human life, animal life, just all forms of life that are under attack from this chemical. And just a side note that also glyphosate isn't the only pesticide. Of course, there are many others that oftentimes some of the insecticides are even more brutal. So I opt to focus on glyphosate because it's the most used. But there certainly is more than just that. What has really alarmed me so much is all the many ways in which it impacts the human body. If you go into anyone can go in. I a lot of times get DMs and emails, and people say, well, do you think this could have something to do with the thyroid disease epidemic? Do you think that it could have something to do with this? And I'm like, well, you are enabled to go, fortunately, to PubMed and go and look up. It's a website you can go and look up. You put in your search terms, you can say glyphosate thyroid and see what scientists have put out there talking about this. And one thing that is very important to do is always look and see what conflicts of interest might be listed on that study, so you can be sure, or at least have a sense of whether or not it was funded by industry or not, because a lot of times those will come out with a very emphatic, oh no, it doesn't cause this condition, when it's paid for by industry. So that's something that's along the learning curve as you're doing your own research. But if you do decide to dig into this, it will be a very long day. And you would find that it's been connected to everything from Alzheimer's to kidney disease to autoimmunity, cancer, infertility, ADHD, anxiety, depression, miscarriages, and vitamin deficiency. Really, most conditions you would be able to point back to this. And of course, the mechanisms are many, and Nasha could elaborate more biological on how that is. But one very key way in which it's impacting the chronic disease epidemic, which, as Nasha was talking about, we have over, I think it's 60% of adults right now have a chronic disease, and it's over half of kids that have a chronic disease in this country, which is completely unsustainable and outrageous. And everyone should be staring and saying, oh my gosh, why would this possibly be? We are in a crisis in this country. And one way in which glyphosate's exacting its business is through the microbiome. And of course, Zach Bush has talked a great deal about this. This has been a real specialty of his. And of course, the more that we learn about the microbiome, the more we know it's absolutely vital to our functioning as humans. And the fact that glyphosate works as an antibiotic to kill off, it's a really awful antibiotic, because it actually kills off the beneficial bacteria, the bifidobacterium and the lactobacillus that we need in order to function and have a healthy body. It specifically kills that, and oftentimes will allow the more pathogenic gut bacteria to proliferate and really wreak havoc in the gut. And so definitely glyphosate is connected with that in this overall dysbiosis. It is also an area that I've been focusing on recently because of the fertility crisis that we are under, and the dramatic drops in testosterone that also Nasha was talking about, as well as fertility numbers, miscarriages are up. Just these numbers are really not looking good for the future of our race. And when you start digging into what glyphosate is doing, it is really appalling. And I actually brought this to the EPA last September, because the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is in charge of our chemicals in this country and what pesticides there are. So you have just a quick overview, because it was a little confusing to me at first. You have the FDA, which is in charge of food, and supposedly should be regulating what is on our food, but actually the chemicals fall under the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And then to make things even more confusing, under the USDA, you have animals and you have farming. So it's really likely deliberately separated so that no one can really make a quick decision or a call on GMOs or pesticides. So what the Congress came in and said, we really need to start studying the endocrine disruption and how we are impacted by all pesticides. So EPA said, okay, great. I'm going to look at this. We're going to look at this. And they did a really cursory overview of these chemicals, which is totally in keeping with how the EPA does not keep us safe. And what they did is they looked at glyphosate, which many people, by the way, have reported this causes endocrine disruption. And they looked at it and they decided upon 32 studies that they were going to base their evaluation as to whether or not glyphosate's an endocrine disruptor or not. 27 of those were paid for by industry. And so what those are going to say. They say, oh, no, there's no evidence of it causing endocrine disruption. The few independent studies that they opted to use also show that there's no impact. So they decided not to do any further study on it. So I went in September with a PowerPoint presentation and I put a picture up on the slide that was men's boxers, and it was 2 men and a woman in there from the Office of Pesticides. And I presented many different pieces of research that were talking about all the ways in which this is disrupting our fertility. First and foremost, I actually several years ago was curious as to whether or not it's found in semen. And I thought that's going to be a big problem because that will mean that it crosses the blood-testes barrier. So I send in 3 semen samples from 3 different men, one of whom actually had recently had an Impossible Burger, which is a glyphosate bomb. And it came back all 3 positive for glyphosate. I'm like, well, this is disturbing because studies show that glyphosate kills sperm. So there actually are several studies that show this to be the case, and it can either slow motility or actually kill the sperm. We now know it crosses the blood-testes barrier. It also has been shown to decrease testosterone. It is actually involved also in disrupting the implantation of embryo into the side of the uterus. It actually goes down when a woman consumes food with glyphosate on it. She's pregnant. It goes down through the umbilical cord into the developing baby, which is how my daughter's baby tooth has glyphosate in it when I sent it in after she lost it. So it is not harmless at all. It's definitely contributing to the fertility crisis. And to even pull it even further, something that's concerning is the effect it has as an androgen. One really important study that came out by Dr. Shauna Swan, who's a fantastic scientist. She wrote the book Countdown, and she's studying the decrease in sperm and fertility. And what they tested a bunch of pregnant women in their second trimester. They were looking to see what the glyphosate level was in urinary content in the second trimester. Then they went and measured the distance of the genitalia between the vagina and the anus. That's the anogenital distance. And what they found is that the higher the level of glyphosate in the urine in that second trimester, the wider that gap became between the vagina and the anus, meaning that it's a masculinization of our female fetuses, depending on whether or not the glyphosate exposure was significant enough. So this is happening in what it is it's really an end of species situation, because nature is saying we are no longer going to allow you to procreate because this is not a safe space for life. And that is what all these reactions are showing. And so it is incredibly frustrating. You can imagine to go and talk to the EPA and have them dismiss it. And so then it comes back to a lot of the things that Oliver was talking about too. So how can we empower ourselves despite this to do something, which is probably close to your second question, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, I was curious to touch, have there been studies, or is anybody studying wildlife or animals? How is this? I mean, it's incredibly upsetting that this is doing so much harm to humans. Yes, of course. But are there studies also being shown, is this affecting wildlife? Because they're doing this in forests, they're doing this everywhere. So
in fact, yes, so it was a really exciting moment because back in 2020, the EPA was ordered to do a biological evaluation on glyphosate, which is a study of how glyphosate is impacting endangered species. And so that's great that they thought to look at it, because it turned out that 93% of endangered species are injured or killed by exposure to glyphosate. And it was nearly 100% of habitats are ruined by glyphosate as well for endangered species. And so those of us working on these subjects were thrilled to see that, because that is enough reason that you should cancel the license for the use of glyphosate. Like, that should just be canceled, because that goes against the law to be impacting our endangered species like that. But it's still just sitting there, you know, with no action to be done. But yes, it
Yeah.
absolutely is. And in terms of the endocrine disruption, I have spoken to a few scientists who have said that that indeed is happening also in wildlife, and which would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think about endangered species, and if this is affecting our fertility rate, how is this affecting animals' fertility rate? Endangered species, are we just bringing them closer to extinction
Absolutely.
on a metabolic level? So from your perspective as an advocate, what recent breakthroughs or strategies have made the biggest strides in shifting the public awareness or policy? Let's see, like, get some positive,
Okay.
positive news here.
Okay, so there are some good things. There's some really good things. So
Of course.
first and foremost, I think the biggest hit recently in the last 5 years against this has been the huge cancer lawsuits against Bayer. This has nearly wiped out Bayer, the pharmaceutical company that purchased Monsanto in 2018, and the irony of them creating cancer, and then Bayer has treatments for cancer. It's like a double profit win for Bayer, and it's disgusting. And but anyway, yes, their stock price has crashed. Now there are shareholder lawsuits that are coming along in addition to those cancer lawsuits. I'm very excited because I actually bought one share of Bayer myself because I wanted to be part of that fight, and so I get to see it from a front row seat.
Cool.
The concerning bit about that is that Bayer now knows that they are in trouble. And if they can't get some sort of protection through the US government, they are likely going to go bankrupt. So what's happening right now, and this is a really alarming thing, it's happening in the Farm Bill. Bayer is trying to set up a liability shield so that if you get sick from pesticide exposure, then from one of their products, then you will not be allowed to sue. So their idea is they want to do something called a federal preemption, in which whatever the EPA says goes for the entire country. And you can't argue it. It just is. It's law. You can't sue if you get sick. And so they actually have made some really significant progress. This is sitting in the current draft of the Farm Bill. And if it passes, then all the farmers that are getting cancer, or, you know, any of the conditions that we're getting, we won't be able to sue. And unfortunately, after talking to a lot of Republicans and Democrats in Congress, it looks like a lot of people are willing to trade that for increased SNAP dollars. So that's food stamps and supplemental nutrition. And I think that that's a really short-term, terrible idea. But that is an area that I've been working on and trying to get people to call their congresspeople and say no liability shield. But on a positive note, Mexico has now said that they reject GMO corn, and they are on their way to also rejecting glyphosate. That is a huge purchaser for the United States. So that is an awesome thing to do. And the United States has been bullying them incessantly, but they are pushing back. They're like, no, the science shows this isn't good for us. And they actually just put out a report this week that was translated into English with all of the most comprehensive science of why they are no longer going to be having it. So that's a big one. The political climate right now, not to get too political, there is increased interest in food toxicity and food as medicine, and we'll see how that plays out over the next 4 years. But there's some hope that there's a new audience for these issues that historically has not been interested. It used to be traditionally a Democrat issue, but now Republicans are rising to the occasion and concerned about food toxicity. So that's hopeful. But finally, and this goes back to like the coolest thing ever, I've been doing some work with Regenified, which is a company that was founded by farmer Gabe Brown. And one of my projects has been to build out a comprehensive pesticide database where you look and see historically how much what are pesticide use trends, what types of pesticides have been used, where has increase gone up, because the industry always argues because of GMOs, we use less pesticides. Turns out totally not true. Pesticide use has gone way up. And what is the most incredible thing is another part of this project is interviewing different farmers, and they are describing their path to decreasing pesticide use as they adopt regenerative farming practices. And hearing these farmers speak about just the miracle of watching their soil heal, and a lot of them are very religious and praying that it's going to work out and they're not going to bankrupt themselves, and seeing that nature takes care of itself when you let it take care of itself. They don't need, and some of them still need glyphosate here and there, but they're not needing to spray down all of their farm all the time, and all the insecticide and all the fungicides. And so that is so enormously rewarding. And I totally second what both the other speakers said. It's supporting these companies that are making this choice in bringing our dollars to them. We don't need to care what they're saying at the EPA or USDA if we do that, because the farmers are ready to go once they see the potential profit in it. So there's the hopeful.
Yeah, and ironically, it's like Bayer, they could be a hero. They could position themselves in a completely different light and just say, okay, we hear it, we see, we can change this. We have so much power, we can actually change the way that we do things, and if every other company was just like, okay, like we hear you, and it's like what Oliver and I were saying. It's like we should have the power to, as the consumer, to dictate how these companies are running our lives, are running the world.
We should. And I would put out there that right now Bayer is a pretty cheap company to buy. So it would be a good opportunity for someone to come in and just shut down the agricultural chemical unit.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's they could shift. They could, I'm not going to leave that off the table for anybody to change their ways, right?
Totally.
That's where I have an open mind, open heart. It's like you can turn the ship around.
That's right.
Or just, sink the ship and let somebody else turn it around.
I mean, that's the thing. That would also work.
Great. Well, I'm gonna move into some more questions that I have that I just want to discuss with everyone. And I'm going to just like pick through these questions that I had. Yes. So looking at the history of food production and seeing how things have really shifted in such a pretty relatively short amount of time, right? Glyphosate came on the shelves in the 1970s. And I'm going to start, I will start with you, Kelly. Do you think that there was a turning point, almost like a tipping point, that led to the disconnect in where we are today?
I don't know that there was something really intentional. I think it was a situation in which profits just took priority, and there was a general ability to co-opt our regulators to such an extent that wasn't always the case. As soon as they were able to buy off the regulators, sponsor this revolving door, which is where a person can work in the EPA, approve glyphosate repeatedly, and then is offered a really fantastic high-paying job on the other side of that. I think once the government was able to do that, everything really started shifting. And another aspect, which I always kind of grapple with, and I hear a lot of feminists talking about this in women's issues, but I do think that, and I don't know what the answer is. I actually am not a chef. Oliver, I'm jealous you are. But I think that when women started leaving the home, that was a big change in the eating that the families were doing, and convenience became really important. And I think with that came a lot more of the processed foods, the easy preparation, because let's be honest, like not many people, it's a luxury if you can sit and at the end of the day, make a really healthy meal. And so that's sort of, I feel like, more the social aspect of how we got here today, because, why not blame women for more things? But I do think that is partially an element of it.
Yeah.
Are you interested in what others have to say?
Yeah, Nasha, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I think you nailed it, and I kind of alluded to it, but really World War II was the shifting point. We had leftover ammo, and we're like, hey, let's put this into big ag and big pharma. That was the big shift, and then those political things aligned. and fell thereafter. And that's also World War II was also the change of, like my mother-in-law was my father-in-law was in World War II, and my mother-in-law had to leave the home and go back to work. Like those were the things that you had to do to support the war movement. And it also got rid of the war, like the war gardens kind of kept things going in that time. But afterwards, everyone wanted to rush to convenience and just licking their wounds after the whole world was at war. You can understand the why, and you can understand there was actually good intention, because people were thinking we can really help each other out now. So it didn't start with a bunch of assholes. It started with people thinking they were going to help our lives be easier. But people like Dr. Huber, who's one of my heroes and mentors today, started sounding the alarm in 1968 that he was seeing problems in the lab with glyphosate. And he warned back then, in a few years, this is going to take over everything, what they were seeing. Man, no truer words spoken. And this man is now, what, 94? And still, like, he won't die until this rests. So let's, let's give him something to continue to live for here. But yeah, lots of changes in a very short time.
Oliver, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually funny. This is exactly what Zach talks about in our film. He really talks about the parallels and the transition from World War II that everyone's kind of been talking about. And from a policy perspective, there was an agricultural economist by the name of Earl Butz who was there during the Nixon administration, I believe. And he famously said to farmers, get big or get out. And that was when there started to be a lot more incentivization for farmers to sort of get rid of hedgerows, get rid of pollinator strips, and just start to grow corn and soy pretty much. And farmers were incentivized and paid to grow one type of crop. And then that kind of coincided with, to grow that one type of crop, you need the agrochemical suite of products that include glyphosate, that include GMO crops, etc. So those two things kind of rose together at the same time. And so you can see historically how policy instruments at the federal level really tilted the scale and moved us in what originally was thought to be a really helpful direction. Even Mark says, never met a bad farmer. They're trying to put food on the table for their families like everyone else. You can't blame people, and they used to, work 40 acres with a horse and buggy, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, this little bottle right here, you can send your kids to college. Like that's a great proposition. But we saw how large scale federal policies really ignited this movement towards large scale use of agrochemicals. And so the question now becomes, and I believe the opportunity is, what happens if we were to shift hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars to support organic regenerative farming and to support these farmers all across the country? How could we bring down the price of organic regenerative crops and produce so that more people have access to them? That's a huge part of this, and that they are a more regular part of our daily lives. Not just the nice thing you can buy at Erewhon, but the thing that your mom is being fed at the hospital, or people at prisons are eating, or definitely schools. We need to, through policy instruments, incentivize and reward and help the farmers who want to transition through time to these new ways of being. It's not a light switch. This is going to be something that we need to start this transition, and that needs to ramp up real fast. But that's what this moment, this cultural moment, zeitgeist moment of like awareness. And I do believe this is a paradigm shift in awareness that we are at it from a cultural perspective. The good work being done, like with people like Kelly and Zach and everyone here, are bringing awareness to these issues. And that is the first step of grassroots change. And we got a lot more work to do, believe me, but it can be done. And I'm excited to see what happens. I think that the next few years are going to determine what happens in the next few decades. And we get to be the ones who are, a part of that change. So we need grassroots, bottom up change, but we also need federal top down change. And we need all of that to happen at once in a momentous symphony. But this awareness and this gathering right here, us talking about it, is a really positive step in that change.
Yeah. And I always come back to just handing it to human beings for figuring out how to, the whole advent of chemical fertilizers and everything, you got to hand it to humans. Like, great job. We did an amazing thing. But now we're at the point where it's like, okay, that wasn't the best thing. So, and that's why I pose this as a tipping point question, because it almost feels like you were just saying, Oliver, we could potentially be in this tipping point going back, or tipping point towards regeneration, and so advocating and I'm going to tie this into a question that somebody asked in the chat. They want to hear one more time what we can do to support the liability on the farm bill not happening.
Huge.
Yeah,
Kelly.
so if you go to probably the easiest thing you could do is go to my Instagram, which is glyphosate girl, and I have a post there that describes a script that you can use to call in to your elected officials and how you look it up and everything. And exactly what to say about how you don't support that, because the way that Bayer has put this into, and they literally wrote it and put it into our farm bill, the way they're calling it a Label Uniformity Act, meaning that it's just such a hassle to have to put different labels according to what state the Roundup or whatever the pesticide is sold in. And so it just should be one label. And so if you sell that to the congressperson, they're like, well, that seems efficient. That makes sense, because they are educated on liability law. And so they don't necessarily know that this is actually a ploy to make sure you can never sue them. So I describe all of that. You can go to Glyphosate Girl, and then it links to my website where it has the long script.
And I just want to get to these questions from the chat as well. And I'm going to give this to Nasha. How do you test these chemicals in the body?
There's a few. In fact, I think Kelly and I are friends with Henry Rollins, who's doing a lot of cool stuff with detoxproject.org. And Henry connected me with a group called Kudzu Science, Kudzu Science, out of France, that does some amazing testing for both just on yourself, your home, your lawn, your water, your soil, your pets. They even have silicone bands for things that you can wear to see what you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. They do a variety of different types of testing for toxicity. Here in the United States, Mosaic, it used to be called Great Plains, I believe was what it was called before, does a really good comprehensive environmental toxicity panel that you can look at all the various pesticides, chemicals, solvents, as well as metals, things that folks are looking at and being exposed to. Those are really helpful tests, because then you can actually get a baseline and then help them take that garbage out and retest them to make sure they're actually making a change. So it's very easy to do a pre and post. Also, by telling you that shows hope that there's something that can be done. You're not just effed. If you see those things, there's something you can do about them. So there's means of taking them safely out of the body. And part of that starts by limiting your exposure or avoiding the exposure the best you can. Today, if you live on the planet, you're getting exposure in your air, soil, and water constantly with these chemicals, because they spread. It's not like your little organic sign on your crop of organic oats sees the glyphosate and somehow wards it off. It doesn't. It goes in from a 2-mile spread of water, soil, and air. And so folks need to be aware of that. And what's sad is that we might get excited about grains and legumes. They're very healthful in the right conditions, but they also sequester. They're very much the chelators of these things and take them right in. So we're ingesting them even more when we're following some of the guidelines, nutritional guidelines, that are pushing our amounts of this because of subsidies, not because of human health. And so there's a lot of variables there. And then just one piece, because I felt like I left everyone on a Debbie Downer as well. And I love when Oliver brought this up. He talked about hospitals having farms, starting to build little, have gardens and farms. We're actually building the first hospital on a farm, not the other way around. On a 1,200-acre organic regenerative farm in Southeast Arizona, a 250,000 square foot, 150-bed hospital. It's an integrative medicine hospital. That's our doctors will be in the fields with the farmers. The farmers will be in teaching the patients how to cook. The patients will be out there, taking care of the orchards and the livestock, and it will bring that ecosystem back into the balance that it was all meant to be, that we hope is a pilot for many of these hospitals and centers all over the globe. And there are a lot of things happening. You know, my group has touched Oliver's groups and Kelly's groups and Farmers Footprint groups and Zach groups. And there is a global movement, you guys, and each and one of you are instrumental in it. We are not just here to be advocates, we are here to be activists, and we are activated.
Exactly. And, you know, I think about the metaphor of, you know, okay, here, I'm going to use this. I'm not going to actually do it, but I could easily take one of these pencils and snap it in half, but I can't take all of these pencils and break them, right? So that's exactly what we are. You know, every one of our voices combined makes one powerful message that is just strong. It's stronger than anything else, you know, and nobody will be able to break us. So that's that. And you know, oh, the other thing with the hospitals and the gardens, you know, it brings in mental health as well, you know, because, and that's a huge element to healing, to our entire overall well-being, right? Mental health is one of those essential things that often doesn't get considered. But for me, going into the garden, that is, and Zach talks about this a lot too. Just go touch a tree, touch a plant, put your bare feet in the ground, you know, interact with the microbiome outside. And, you know, that just will immediately change your day. It'll bring you down. If you're stressed, just go interact with your garden, a tree, a plant, a bush, anything. And that's, you know, I think having the mental health element within these hospital farm situations, that's going to, I believe that will help people heal so much faster.
Agreed, agreed. And it's cool, Andrew, you talk about the microbiome, you talk about the soil health. There's actually an organism in the soil that acts as a natural SSRI, a natural antidepressant. And for the love of God, I can't remember the name of it right now, but just Google that. And so literally getting your hands in the soil is your infusion of, you know, Prozac in there, and then bring in the elements of nature. Americans spend less than 15 minutes outdoors every day. You're connecting back with the rhythm of you and the rhythm of the world around you. And then you're connecting with, as Oliver said, the food. You know, farmers have become, they were farmers who were nourishing us, who then turned into commodities people who then are now coming back to nourishment. Like they've made their own cycle through this. It's really cool to watch this unfold.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes into the kitchen too. I mean, that's when you're, you know, if you are a cook and you like to cook, that's one of those healing, those mental health healing moments, you know, just for me also, when I'm in the kitchen, it's just everything is okay.
Amen.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And so there were more questions, but I wanted to ask you all before we log off here. And I mean, we've been talking for an hour and a half, and this can easily go on for many more hours because first off, the conversation doesn't end here. And I really encourage everybody in this call now and anybody watching afterwards to keep the conversation going, you know, when in your family, in your neighborhood, with your grocery store, with your restaurant, and within our own community too. Let's continue sharing resources and just spreading this word. And so for each one of you in our last few minutes here, if you could leave the audience and everybody listening with one action to take after today, what would it be? And I'm going to start with you, Kelly.
One thing that was really impactful for me when I first started becoming an activist and wanted to make more of a change. I actually was someone that was extremely afraid of public speaking my whole life, like terrified, would be in the back of a classroom. And when I understood this message needed to be shared, I went and started taking Toastmasters classes. And found that super helpful. And now I no longer have this issue, but it's something that is so empowering. So if anyone has the slight inclination to start getting up and speaking, whether it's at your community or bigger events or small events, it can be really life-changing for you as a person and makes so much impact. Because if one person hears your message, that even if you were at a Toastmasters, you do a thing on glyphosate, that's hugely impactful. So that is my advice.
Awesome. Oliver, what do you have to say?
Well said, Kelly. I agree with that completely. The power of our food choices are immense and delicious. So when you can, where you can, switch one. Next time you go to the grocery store, look for the regenerative organic certification, and switch one of your items, whether it's eggs or rice or beans or olive oil, whatever it is, make one switch. And if you can, or you live near a farmer's market, please go to a farmer's market, once a month, depending on the season, depending on where you live. Talk to a farmer. They're amazing people. They're incredibly inspiring. They want to talk to you. They want to talk to you about their produce. That is a powerful thing to do. And when you get food sourced locally, as soon as I know you said one thing, as soon as you harvest a plant, it starts to die. So even if you get a vegetable in the grocery store, maybe it was harvested a week ago, 2 weeks ago, it was in some building somewhere in a refrigerator. If you go to the farmer's market, you're getting stuff that was harvested 24 hours ago, 48, maybe 36 hours ago. You were getting the most nutrient dense food possible, the most healing food possible. And a lot of those farms are organic, moving towards regenerative. So you don't have to throw away everything in your house. You can still enjoy a great dinner party. In fact, I recommend it. But switch some of your staples, and I think begin to enjoy what the future looks like. And it's delicious. And yeah, have a great, cook a great meal with your friends and family, have a glass of wine, enjoy life. And we can have a really positive impact through our food choices. And just remember that.
100%. Nasha, how do you want to?
I love it. First of all, I'm a total foodie person, Oliver, so I love those points. So first of all, I want everyone to remember you are far, far, far more powerful than anyone has led you to believe. So take that with you no matter what. So I love Kelly's like getting your voice and getting out there, find that. But beyond knowing your farmer and creating those relationships, which are so, so important, I also just want you to get back into the rhythm of the cycles of nature, both inside and outside of you, because that does allow a deeper cultivation and reconnection and remembering. I saw someone use those terms in the chat of who you are and where you come from. Because what we've got today is not from our genetic origin. What we have today takes us further and further away from ourselves and from each other. And so reestablishing those patterns, my rituals are watching the sunrise and set when I'm not on a webinar, every day that I possibly can, knowing exactly when my moon is at its fullest and at its newest, knowing those rhythms, it helps me establish that rhythm within myself. And just being, a nature of following the light. I mean, our cells, our mitochondria are little light receivers, and they know if you're up past your bedtime looking at blue screens, right? So reestablish that rhythm within yourself and to the nature around you. That really does open up another opportunity of healing and resilience.
That's beautiful. Thank you all so much. I'm super jazzed, super inspired. I mean, when we all come together, our voice is strong. So following each one of those points, we've got this. We can, the pendulum is swinging, and we can make this tipping point back into regeneration. So thank you all so much for being here. And thanks to everybody who joined us. And
Thank you, Andrew.
And happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.